Welcome to week 4 of our class. We have officially hit the midpoint. And this week there's actually 2 videos. I decided to split present levels and goals and progress monitoring into 2 separate videos. In this particular video, we're going to be talking about chapter 4, and we're going to be setting up the present levels assignment. Across both videos, my goal is to help you learn how to write present levels and goals that are incredibly strong and amazing, but also just don't take over your entire life. Chapter 4 is an interesting chapter for me because there were a lot of things that I found in it that didn't quite reflect the way we typically do things in the state of New Hampshire, and some things that just didn't reflect what I personally find to be best practices. So I've pulled out the sections of the chapter that I think are the most helpful to read, and then the sections that I might just skip. So I would skip pages 62 to 68, and I would actually just skim from page 70 until the end. So in the state of New Hampshire, we are incredibly lucky and fortunate because for some reason, the state, and we are the only state that has done this, we separate out academic needs, developmental needs, and functional needs into separate boxes. Most states just have academic needs and functional needs, or they might have communication in its own box. And to be honest, nobody's ever really explained to me the difference between developmental and functional needs. And so I did some research, and if this is not what you guys are hearing at your sites, please correct me. I would love to hear what folks are hearing about these boxes. So academic performance is pretty basic. This is where you put how the student is doing in reading, writing, and mathematics. For me, at this point, that's where I put how they are doing in reading, writing, and mathematics if those are the areas where the student is below grade level. I put the areas where they're at grade level in their strengths. You might hear something different at your school site. Anyhow, I have grayed out developmental performance because the way that the state explained it back in 2021, which was the only explanation I could find, it's really where the child's developmental milestones and their actual development is going to go in. For me, that's the type of information that gets put in at an initial IEP. It might get updated at a 3-year evaluation, or a related service provider might choose to update it sooner. But for me, it's not a section that I'm typically going to touch. Functional performance, however, that's where you can put executive functioning progress. You can also put in the child's social and emotional progress and where they're at, anything about sensory information. So to me, this is the section where I will write all of the things that don't fit neatly into those buckets of reading, writing, and mathematics. To be honest, I often put executive functioning up in academic performance, but there is a really strong argument for it to go in the functional performance box. So chapter 4 has an awful lot of jargon, which is why I've done a slightly longer video and really pulled out some sections of this chapter because I want to focus in on what's important about present levels and not to force you guys to learn a whole bunch of new jargon. One of the sections that I pulled out is on writing a culturally responsive present level section. This is an incredibly important thing to do. But for me, most of my career has been teaching kiddos who are refugees and who are immigrants, and I've never put that information in the present levels. The present levels is about the kids' development. It's about their reading, writing, and mathematics. And so I just have a slight difference of opinion with the book. You are more than welcome to read that section and to think about what your opinion is and how you think that a good present level should be structured. The most important thing in this chapter is data. And the most important thing about present levels is data. Clear, specific, actionable data that tells you where a student is and what they can do. The data sets up everything else in the IEP, from the goals to the services. Data needs to be clearly written, and the section needs to be clearly written and jargon-free, but we want to have the type of data that captures who the student is. The chapter goes a lot into possible sources of data, and the fact is that everything is data. How a kid does on an online reading comprehension program, that's data. How they do on a classroom test, that's data. What you observe when you walk into that class for 2 seconds to talk to the teacher, that is also data. So is sentences that students write in their journals. That's also data, and so is what they write in the lab report, right? Here are some academic present levels that I wrote early in my time in New Hampshire. I am not holding these up as examples of amazing present levels. These are present levels that I wrote and structured in a particular way because it would make my boss happy. And I think they are Not the worst that have existed, but definitely not the best. I've spent a lot of my career thinking about how we can write better present levels in special education. And I want to delve into what I think present levels really should look like for a minute. SpedHelper is my website. I do use a lot of resources from it in this class. So, yep, hopefully you don't hate all of them. And I have a lot of free materials from the website up on our course modules for you as well. So here's an example of what I think a really good mathematics present levels might sound like for a younger student. So here I want to know how high can the child count? What numbers do they know? Can they do addition and subtraction? What type of functional life math skills do they have? Like how do they actually do in their classroom? In general, I write my goals and really try to focus in as much as I can on what a child is the worst at. I will try to do one goal for math, one for reading, one for writing. If a kid is really bad in a subject area, I might do two, but my goal is generally to try for one goal per subject area and to have that goal be the thing that the child is worst at. Remembering that a child's goals do not set all of their academic instruction. They're getting more instruction than that. It really should be something to focus in on where the child is the most behind and where it would help the kid the most catch up to other students at their grade level. Here's a mathematics present level for a slightly older student. Note that this present level doesn't take any longer to write than the not so awesome one that I showed you before. The difference is the amount of data that I have. So now that I'm more comfortable teaching in New Hampshire, I'm more comfortable at my school, I email general education teachers and I get their updates. I ask kids to share their projects with me so I can look at them and get data from that. I pop into their classrooms more. I have a lot more data to draw on, and that's led to me writing maybe not perfect present levels, but ones that certainly look a lot better than the ones I was writing a couple of years ago. Here's an example of what a full present levels might look like. Yours doesn't have to look like this, but this is what it could look like. Rich and full of actionable, comprehensible data on a student. And I've put links in the modules for more resources from SpedHelper. That's where these examples are from. And then some free materials from there in case they're helpful for you. I don't actually have great examples. Whoops, where am I? Sorry, I've lost my thing. Key thing for present levels is being able to collect the correct data. You want to gather as much data as you possibly can. I've got a lot of tips up on SpedHelper for assessment resources. I also have some assessment packets that I've created for kindergarten to fifth grade, a couple of different packets that I'm putting up on the Canvas modules for you guys to have access to. I don't actually have anything great for high school, although I teach at high school. That is a work in progress, which I hope to get to sometime soon. And I don't actually have any great resources up on the website for social emotional present levels. I have put up on our Canvas site a book that this comes from of goals and baseline ideas for social emotional and executive functioning goals, but I don't have any great present level information there. In general, the easiest present levels to write are on things that are like missing and not done work because you can actually just pull that information off of the student information system. Unsafe behaviors tend to be pretty easy too because there's often a paper trail, whether it's suspensions or behavior referrals. In general, other than that, for social, emotional, and executive functioning goals, keeping track of behavior contracts or collecting data during the day, like noting down how many times a kid blurts out in a 10-minute time span can be really, really helpful. So bottom line, here are my recommendations for New Hampshire present levels based on what has seemed to work well here. I label each section of my present levels by subject to make them easy to navigate. I don't put things where the kid's really good in the present level section. So if the child is reading at grade level, I will put that in the strength section, and I'll put in some information about how great a reader that student is and how they're working at grade level. And then I save the present levels for the subject areas and target skills where a student is not working at grade level. I find that that just makes it a little bit easier for families to follow and makes the document just a little bit less confusing. They know if it's in the present levels, it's because it's something the kid needs to work on. You can do yours differently, but that's worked pretty well for me in this state. For each academic and behavioral area in the present level, state what the child can do, not what they can't. You want to be as positive as you can and as clear as you can. So, for example, you might want to state that a student can read 32 words per minute at a second grade level. They can count to 20. They know 15 multiplication facts. They can solve problems like x plus 2 equals 7 with 88% accuracy. They turned in 20% of formative assignments in quarter 3, right? So put specific information about what a student can do. Then be specific and then use data. Use all the data that you have. I think we often underestimate how much data we have about students, but you have a lot. Every time you see that student in the hallway talking to their friend, that's data. You know that that student has a friend. That's important information, right? We have a lot more data than we think we do. So put as much of it as you can in the present level, and don't be afraid to ask general education teachers and colleagues for their insights into how a student is doing. Last thing before we move on, one of your 2 assignments for next week is to bring in a draft of a functional and an academic present level statement to class for us to workshop and edit. So that's part 2 of the IEP component plan. I just want you to bring in it present levels that has the academic present levels for a student and the functional present levels for a student if that's relevant for the student. I know this explanation was pretty long for one chapter, so I'm going to put the rest of the information into a separate chapter. There are a lot of resources for you up on Canvas that I've made over the years that are hopefully helpful to you. And there is one quick puzzle question for you at the end of the video. Good luck, have fun reading the chapter, and happy IEP writing.